Hello and welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana, the educational series. As always, I'm your host, Alex Aldea.
I am your co-host, Ferrigno.
And today, we're going to be talking about a little something called Western magic. Now, David, can you see something special about the title page today before I bust into the presentation?
Well, I see magic spelled in two different ways, Alex.
That is very observant, David. You win the banana sticker because, yes, that's great. Well, so the reason for that, we'll go through it, the idea of differentiating between different arts, different ways to think about magic, and even different ways to spell the word. So, without further ado, let us attract your attention to our small to our small logo on the side there, and let you know that number one, what's interesting is that magic has often been extraordinarily misunderstood, especially in the West in the modern day. So magic, or magic with a K, as many traditions prefer. So, let's talk about it in the next 25 minutes or so. We'll embark on a bit of an odyssey through the millennia of esoteric thought and practice, see how ritual, symbol, and focused intention have been harnessed by serious students and practitioners of the occult to transform mind, body, spirit, and environment. Whether you're naturally skeptical or already curious about magic's possibilities, by the end you'll have a clear, grounding understanding of its history, core principles, and practical applications in modern life. So, that was a wordy introduction to say, let's talk about magic.
And we're not talking about Harry Potter here.
That's correct. That's correct, David. So, here's our roadmap for today's journey. First, we're going to nail down what Western magic really is. Just as crucially, what it isn't. So you can distinguish genuine occult practice from parlor tricks or Harry Potterism, right? Next, we'll explore its historical roots from the temple libraries of ancient Egypt to the Greek magical papyri through medieval grimoires, Renaissance alchemy, up to the occult revivals of the 19th and 20th centuries. Then we're going to unpack four foundational concepts of magic, which is correspondence, polarity, will, and energy that underlie every magical system in the West. We're not talking about Eastern magic now, so let's differentiate between the two, right? This is strictly the Western tradition today that we're going to cover. So, with that in mind, you'll see a hands-on practices in action, for instance, ceremonial magic, divination, meditation and visualization, sigil magic, and even pathworking, and we'll find out what pathworking is and what that applies to. So finally, we're going to talk ethics, how to integrate magic into everyday life, and why these techniques remain profoundly relevant today. Are you ready, David?
I am.
So, what is magic? Well, at its essence, magic is the art of directing focused intention, your will, through symbols, ritual, and alignment with natural laws to bring about change. So one of the main people that popularized magic in about the past century and a half is a gentleman, well, I use that term loosely, Aleister Crowley, famously defined magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. So he actually spelled it with that K to separate true occult practice from the stage illusions and sleight of hand stunts you see in magic shows, because at that time stage magic was particularly interesting. You had a little bit after that, but you had Houdini, you had a whole bunch of others that popularized stage magic, and to the modern untutored person, the salt of the earth, or clod, if you will, they oftentimes could not differentiate between what was ceremonial magic, what was stage magic, and how to tell those two things apart. So this is not about pulling rabbit out of hat, folks. It's about deep inner work and subtle influence over one's own consciousness and the world around us. So, Western magic is grounded in serious spiritual disciplines, not escapist fantasy. You won't find dragons or laser shooting wands here. Instead, we'll engage in archetypical symbols, correspondences, and invisible energies, sometimes called ki or chi, prana or magical force, and so on. Ritual functions as a precise psychological tool. By organizing your environment and mind around a clear intention, you create a resonant loop that transforms your inner state, and by extension, your outer circumstances. So what are the roots of ancient Western magic? Well, our story begins in the temples and libraries of ancient Egypt, where scribes inscribed spells on papyri to heal, protect, and divine. These writings migrated into the Greco-Roman world, where Hermetic texts attributed to Hermes Trismegistus taught that the foundational principle, as above, so below, the correspondence between the macrocosm and the microcosm. Neoplatonist philosophers like Plotinus also developed a model of divine emanations and the soul's ascent. These strands of ritual invocation, sacred geometry, and metaphysical theory wove together into the tapestry of magic that scholars and practitioners would draw upon for centuries. During the medieval and Renaissance times, magic became particularly interesting because at that point, and for shortly thereafter, it was in flower and then it immediately started to decline. Do you know why, Dave?
I do not, Alex.
Because of the Inquisition, David. So the last places that hung on magic-wise, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, was Benevento, Italy. That was one of the last places that you encountered things like Dionysian cults and so on, which is one of the things that the author of the Immortality Tool talks about in his book, where he thought that initially Christianity was the offshoots or the successor of some type of Dionysian cults, where both the ritual wine and wheat, so in other words, both parts of the Eucharist, were actually originally psychedelic, leading to magical practices of all kinds. Interesting theory. Now, during these eras, magic was woven into the fabric of learned culture rather than relegated to superstition. So that means that it was a part of the day-to-day life of these people. For them, magic existed in the world every day. The universities in Bologna and Paris taught canon law alongside Aristotle, and many high-ranking clerics kept grimoires, handbooks like the Key of Solomon, or the Arabic-Latin Picatrix, which I have in the other room, the Guide to Planetary Hour Rituals, Talisman Creation, and Spirit Invocation. So in the royal courts from Burgundy to Prague, from Hungary all the way to England, physicians brewed Paracelsian spigeric tinctures. So that was basically alchemical herbal remedies, timed to the lunar phases to treat plague and melancholia, blending occult science with emerging medicine. Meanwhile, alchemists such as Finico and Pico della Mirandola saw the quest to turn lead into gold as a metaphor for inner transformation, mapping the Negredo, Albedo, and Rubedo stages onto the soul's journey. Jewish Kabbalah, transmitted through Spanish mystics, overlaid these practices with the Tree of Life, tying ritual magic to a theosophical architecture of divine emanations. So that was the Middle Ages, and as I said, we now take a hiatus of a couple hundred years easily because the Inquisition did its work quite well, and magic went underground for almost 400 years before it really reemerged. So we fast forward to the 19th century, in fact, the late 19th century. Industrialization and romantic mysticism sparked an occult renaissance. In 1888, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn codified centuries of scattered lore into a graded curriculum, teaching tarot, astrology, geomancy, Enochian angel magic, daily ritual practice to initiates like W.B. Yeats, Aleister Crowley, and so on. Crowley's later system of Thelema, launched in 1904 with the Book of the Law, integrated yoga, ceremonial sex magic. That's always fun, isn't it, Dave? Dramatic Enochian rituals in orders like the AA and the OTO. Mid-20th century pioneers such as Dion Fortune emphasized psychic self-defense and esoteric Christianity, while Gerald Gardner's adaptation of folk witchcraft created Wicca, which again started as a sex cult. Then, in the 1970s and 80s, chaos magic figures like Peter J. Carroll and Ray Sherwin rebelled against lineage-bound practice, declaring belief itself a tool and championing pragmatic, results-driven ritual that borrowed freely from any tradition. So, our former guest and possibly future guest, Dorothy, who's a friend of ours and a psychic, is by her own admission a chaos witch. So she practices chaos magic to some extent, which is very interesting. We should talk more about that next time we have her on the show. So what are the key concepts of magic, I hear you asking, David? The correspondence is the first. The idea that colors, plants, elements, and symbols resonate with universal patterns. So that's part of the lecture that we talked about with the, I guess I was doing correspondence without ever really thinking about it. The idea of the quantum entanglement, right? So one thing over somewhere in the universe can move something else in the universe at the exact same time and space. I should say irrespective of time and space. Polarity is the second one, and that's the interplay of opposites, light and dark, active and passive, masculine and feminine, light and cold, hardness and softness, smoothness and solidity. It's a little Easter egg from a Masons. The third one is the intent and the will. This is what Aleister Crowley focused on. Your focused consciousness, the primary driver of any magical act. And the fourth, energy and astral planes. Recognizing and directing invisible forces and sometimes journeying into subtle realms of images and archetypes. Mastering these concepts allows you to design rituals and practices that speak directly to both psyche and the cosmos.
And one concept we don't have down is spelling correspondence on the last slide, Alex.
Well, you can't have everything, David.
Can't spell check at all. Sorry, folks.
No one cares. Moving on. Correspondence in action. What does correspondence actually mean here? So, as above, so below, right? First appeared in the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, as opposed to the Fugazi tablets of Thoth, which a lot of folks are bandying around the internet these days, and was expanded by Renaissance magic and magi like Agrippa into detailed tablets linking zodiac signs to organs, planets to metals, and herbs to virtues. In practice, you might seek persuasive communication by performing a ritual under, let's say, Mercury's hour or Saturn's hour, right? So you burn, under Mercury's hour, you would burn orange scented incense, place a clear quartz on a silver surface, and visualize the caduceus symbol. Tarot readers lay multiple correspondences when they place the magician card in the spread, combining numerology, elemental glyphs, and planetary associations to amplify willpower. Modern practitioners consult Kabbalah, both the guides and the grimoires, or even their smartphone apps to align candles, herbs, and timings, creating a coherent ritual language that resonates with subconscious and astral currents alike. Now, what is ritual magic? We talked about it briefly. Let's talk about it in depth now. Ceremonial magic is a choreography of the mind and the spirit. You draw pentagrams or hexagrams in the air, you recite invocations, and you wield 4 core tools. The wand, which is akin to your will or corresponds to your will. The chalice, which corresponds to your emotion. The sword, which corresponds to your thought. And the pentacle, or pentacle, as corresponds to matter itself, And you see how these relate directly to the four suits of the tarot deck, right? You with me?
I am.
Excellent. Ritual typically begins with banishing unwanted energies, then moves into invocation of planetary and divine powers, focuses on the intent through concentrated meditation, and then concludes with grounding and gratitude. Over time, these repeated structures train your mind to enter into altered states at will and to project intention with precision. Now, how do you use some of this stuff? Well, let's look at divination, for instance. Tarot, runes, scrying, and so forth. They're not fortune-telling toys, my friends, but mirrors reflecting your psyche and potential futures. A carefully laid tarot spread can illuminate relational dynamics. Runestones can offer yes-no guidance for daily decisions, and natal astrology charts map lifelong energetic patterns. Even your hand can tell all kinds of things about you, whether you get married, how long you're going to live, and so on. The skill lies in this disciplined intuition, learning to interpret symbols in context. And that means basically keeping a magical journal of insights, not necessarily a book, but in your mind, and revisiting readings to spot recurring themes. In this way, divination becomes a two-way conversation with the unseen. So our friend Danny's getting extremely good at reading his tarot cards. He's memorized a bunch of them already. And we've been doing a lot of tarot, and we've bought ourselves a whole bunch of different decks. I'll show one or two of them that are not in the car afterwards. So, how about some sigil magic? I'm sorry, before we get there, let's talk about meditation and visualization. So no magician bypasses meditation. I know, meditation's boring. You don't want to sit there. Your legs cramp up. Your breath is all out of whack. If you want to be doing this kind of work at the level of an adept, you must meditate, at least daily, if not more frequently. Simple breath work stabilizes the mind, but advanced techniques involve guided visualizations, journeys through inner landscapes where you can meet spirit guides, traverse elemental temples, and sculpt energy forms. Whether you're practicing candle gazing, crystal gazing, silent mantra repetition, fire gazing, or immersive pathwork scripts, these disciplines build the neural pathways required to hold intent, shape imagery in a vivid way, and navigate astral realms with clarity and confidence. Sigil magic. This emphasizes and epitomizes efficiency. You write a concise statement of intent. For instance, quote, "I speak with confidence," unquote. Then reduce it to a unique glyph. Charge it through rhythmic concentration or esoteric methods. And finally, forget it by burning the paper or hiding the symbol. This bypasses the critical mind and programs your inner psyche to enact the desire unconsciously. Over days or weeks, you'll notice subtle shifts aligning with your goal, often in unexpected ways. Now, I know you've all been asking yourselves, Alex, what is pathworking? Well, we'll tell you. Pathworking is guided journeying through structured symbolic maps, most famously of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, with its tenfold Sephiroth and 22 connecting paths. You might enter the realm of Bina, or understanding, to deepen intuition, then climb the veiled path to Chokmah, wisdom, to integrate insight. Experienced magicians record these journeys as scripts, which are played back during trance, and conduct them live in ritual settings. The result is visceral, my friends. Archetypal learning that accelerates personal growth and soul integration. This stuff works, folks. That's why folks fear it. That's why folks don't understand it. That's why if you practice it, use caution. Spiritual alchemy is something that can be used from everything from martial arts to actual art, fine art, to artisanship, to basically any part of life that you choose to engage in. even professions like the practice of law, the practice of medicine, practice of engineering, and so on. You can use any of these as a rubric through which to journey spiritually as well as making a buck. Spiritual alchemy uses the metaphor of turning lead into gold to chart inner transformation. Nigredo, or blackening, marks the confrontation with shadow and ego dissolution. Albedo, or whitening, brings purification, compassion, and rebirth. Rubedo, or reddening, unites opposites in wholeness and creative power. Many keep alchemical journeys, noting dreams, emotional breakthroughs, and synchronistic events as markers of progress through these stages. Before we go any further, let's talk for a minute about the ethics of magic. I think it's important to mention this part of it because it speaks to any power gives you an advantage in life, an advantage over others, an advantage towards your own path, and with power comes responsibility. So, power without responsibility can, of course, wreak havoc. Many Western magic schools invoke a threefold return principle. The idea that actions, good or ill, circle back 3 times over to adhere to the harm none ethics. This is white magic, possibly gray magic. Black magic, they're on their own path, and, you suffer for it. Whether you're casting healing spells, manifesting abundance, or simply clearing your space, it's vital to respect free will. Consider the broader consequences and call on higher or inner guides to keep your work balanced and constructive. Just keep that in mind, folks. Do what you wilt. However, exercise responsibility towards other people. It's the right thing to do. How about some integration into daily life, Dave? The true art of magic reveals itself when ritual becomes routine. Medieval folk magicians tucked protective herbs into hearths. Today's urban occultists might bless their morning coffee with a quick sigil charge or pause midday to ring a chime and recite a planetary mantra. Before sleep, they jot 3 synchronistic moments in a dream journal to heighten your sense of magical flow. Over time, these micro-rituals, as we call them, rewire your daily habits so that every action, sending an email, cooking a meal, watering plants, becomes an opportunity to co-create consciously with subtle energies. So let's talk a little bit about Western magic today. In 2025, Western magic is thriving in both digital and traditional spheres. Open source libraries host scanned grimoires, apps calculate planetary hours, and generate random tarot spreads. YouTube and Discord buzz with live-streamed rituals and ingenuity in sigil designs. Academic journals explore the neuroscience of intention and altered states, while underground covens maintain centuries-old ceremonies in private lodges. Maybe in Masonic lodges, maybe not. We don't know, and we're not telling. Wellness brands even market lunar ritual kits, combining crystals and essential oils that you can rub on yourself and run around nude in the full moon. I had to stop Dave from doing that. He was getting out of hand. From high-tech mimetic magicians to lineage-focused initiations, the tradition remains a living, involved current, proof that humanity's urge to shape mind and matter, and even spirit, with ritual logic endures. So, thank you for joining us on this whirlwind tour of Western magic's concepts and practices. I hope you've gained both some historical context, a little bit of practical insight, both into how we have focused intention and symbolized resonance through that correspondence we were talking about before, as well as ritual structure, and how all of these can be taken together to reshape your inner world and outer reality. Now, I'd love to hear your questions, David. How about some experiences or maybe even some challenges? Let's dive into the topic.
Well, let's start. So, Crowley said every intentional act is a magical act. And
That's a good way to put it.
would you say, from his perspective, is he a misunderstood genius, or was he an egomaniac and master manipulator, or was he both?
The answer is yes.
Great.
I think not only was he was a genius. I think no one will debate that. But that doesn't make you right. So part of the issue with him is he took everything, all these magical concepts, he took literally. He thought, he would make cakes with menstrual fluid and other things in them and eat them. He would and ask others to do so. He made black masses that involved lots of sexual practices mixed with yoga and other things. You can't fault the guy for not caring. Clearly he cared. The question is, was he right, and was he doing well for humanity and the world around us? Well, I will say this about that. He basically blew through every oath he ever took. He was the Captain Morgan of magic. And another Easter egg for the Masons. But without him doing that, I don't think we'd have any sort of magical practice today. He was almost solely responsible for the magical occult practices renaissance that happened. Now, he wasn't responsible for the whole thing. He was responsible for the beginning of it, the bringing it out into the light, getting people interested in it again, and moving from there. So, the 18th and 19th centuries were huge in, and 20th centuries were huge in the practice of magic, the bringing back of magic, and so on. For instance, Martinism as a lineage began again, or I should say, reemerged into the public under Gerard Ancas or Pappas, and that was in the 1800s, going into the 1900s. Madame Blavatsky, right? She was there with Theosophy, as well as Helena Rorish and her husband. So there was lots of stuff that was going on around that time. There's a whole milieu, if you will, to use the French term, of a whole stew of Masonic and magical and other esoteric things that were all happening in and around that time.
So then what is your opinion for modern day magical orders like Golden Dawn revival groups or OTO? Are they maintaining their authenticity, or do you think they're straying into dogma?
Well, we all know some OTO guys, don't we, guys? But I will tell you this, and they'll probably disagree with me, and maybe we'll have one on the podcast sometime if they want to out themselves as being OTO or Golden Dawn. But I do genuinely believe that Golden Dawn and esoteric practices like OTO do try their best to be repositories of magic, repositories of magical tradition, and keepers of the flame to sort of move magic forward. Do they succeed? I don't know. They get caught up in a lot of egotistical stuff, in my personal opinion. And that's not the judge. If people want to go through that particular, right, I'm a libertarian at heart. You do you guys. But as far as I'm concerned, you also want to, on some level, bring some positivity to the world. Or if you're not at least doing that, at least don't harm others, right? Let them have their paths. That's the other side of the libertarian tradition. Do what you want to do, but don't bother anybody else's stuff. And sometimes these practices, and I'm not just singling these two out, I'm also talking about some dark magic paths and other stuff, they get rapacious. They want what they want. They don't care who they hurt. They don't care what the consequences are. And they go down the quote-unquote left-hand path. I'll say things like the Setians and other places like that, other type of societies of that kind. And again, not judging. If guys want to join that, absolutely fine. I got zero problem with it as an esoteric concept. It's just the effects on the world can sometimes be undesirable. But then again, if I'm really being honest, too many goody two-shoes white magicians who also have their agendas and want to quote-unquote fix the world can cause just as much problems as they can. So let's be honest here. I mean, it's really about trying to keep your ego out of it as much as possible.
Yeah, I think that's where, the Western tradition is a little bit different than the Eastern tradition, right? And I know we didn't get much into that, but...
Well, we will. We'll do another presentation on the Eastern ideas.
Right. I think, obviously, in this case, the ego, is ultimately, you're trying to transcend it, right? And essentially, I think, the ultimate aim is gnosis in a sense, and I think there's definitely a little bit of a disconnect sometimes when your ego gets in the way of, connecting with the divine.
Agreed.
So, there's certainly that disconnect. And, to your point, I think, the ritual and everything else is ceremoniously important, but I think people need to look at that inner journey and, really reflect on that. So
let me ask you a question now. So, how does that work in your life? So, in other words, you look at your path, and you have a lot of tools at your disposal. You're a Mason, you're a Martinist, you're probably a bunch of other stuff that whether you want to talk about it or don't want to talk about it. And so, how do you use these sort of tools to improve the type of thing that we're talking about?
So, I think first and foremost, and I'm not necessarily saying this is occult related or whatever else, but I think most importantly is setting an intention, but also the grounding, the spiritual protection. So, when you're actually seeking knowledge, you're seeking this inner wisdom and trying to connect with the divine. I think it's very important for people to remember you need to spiritually protect yourself and put on that spiritual armor, because you can certainly transcend and connect with entities or beings that are not necessarily in your best interest or trying to help you. They're actually trying to cause you harm. So I think it's important to, meditate and pray for discernment, try to discern what's truth and what isn't, try to take the ego out of the equation, because at the end of the day, we all want certain outcomes. We're trying to manifest certain things, but realistically, we come into this world with nothing, we leave with nothing. So, yes, obviously, people want to be on this quest for money, wealth, whatever you want to call it, fame, fortune, but I think it's important at the end of the day to remember we're all here trying to serve mankind and trying to be the best human beings we possibly can. And I think that's what's important with these teachings. And, to your question with the various tools, I just try to meditate, connect with, spirit guides. Sometimes there's some astral projection. Sometimes there's some weird dreams that get thrown into the mix. But, at first I always try to ground and always do that spiritual protection before even dabbling with it. And I think that's really important to do.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Any other questions to chat about? Anything else you wanted to bring up?
So, I know you mentioned quantum entanglement before. Do you feel that, these new paradigms like these quantum entanglement in physics or simulation theory resonate within this magical worldview?
I do. A lot of people have said, magic is just science that people don't understand. I actually say the opposite. I think science is magic that people don't understand. The fact that it's magic, in other words, magic is the creative weave through which everything goes. Now, you can explain it by science. It has a scientific component, let's say, but it also has a spiritual component. That's where people like Yuval Noah Harari have it totally wrong, to be honest with you. And he's a lot more famous than we are, Dave. So, at least so far. But his book Sapiens, and Homo Deus, he talks a lot about human potential, but at the very beginning of the book, he basically says, well, you can't quantify the soul, so it doesn't exist for all intents and purposes. Let's just move on, discount it, and talk about, everything else. Well, when you discount the soul, you discount everything, in essence. I mean, you're left with just basic matter. And when you have that, how could you possibly ever have a full picture of the universe and its possibilities? I just don't think it's possible. You're putting one arm behind your back, right? You're tying one arm behind your back. So, in that respect, and feel free to disagree. We love spurring debate. But honestly, I think if you're being honest, you look at a piece of art, you look at a beautiful day, or the worst storm you've ever seen. God is in everything, and magic is in everything, and this eternal spirit that lives right here, right next to us, and we do our best to try to close our eyes to it because it makes us uncomfortable. It makes us start to ask questions about the universe that lead us to places that we may not feel comfortable going to, and so we run. And we focus on the matter because matter is something clear. It's something you can understand. You can touch it. You can smell it. You can feel it. You can taste it. And so on. Don't taste other people too much. That gets into a whole other path. Yeah.
Oh, especially in some of those rituals with the menstrual.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I'll just say 2 words to you. Long pig. All right? Take it easy.
And actually, Hogan and Scott Walter on our podcast with them recently touched upon some of that. It's kind of interesting too, because I think Aleister Crowley really, his magic version is very self-centered, but it's not selfish. And I think there's a distinction and alignment there that, you're seeking your true will, and, that's really divine and cosmic in origin. And I think, from that perspective, you need to keep your ego in check to make sure you reach that state.
Yeah, we have a friend who has said on multiple occasions, well, you got OTO all wrong. It's the left-hand path is just as viable a pathway to enlightenment as the right-hand path. So, you just can't be of the light. You can be of the other stuff and be okay. In fact, you could be probably ahead of the game. Yes, maybe. If you can put your will aside fully and just focus on bringing in the universal will, God's will, and working from there, okay. But then you don't really need a path if you are on that path, right? That's the pathless path. That's the Tao. You're in the stream at that point. You're one with the universe. You don't need any path. The whole idea of the paths, I think, is to provide a regimentation and a routine and a structure for those that aren't there energetically or disciplinarily. They're not adepts of that kind. And so they need some path to get there. I just think, and it's just my opinion, but I think the left-hand path is more to distraction than anything else. And it's certainly not for a beginner. I think you would get absolutely lost in the utter wastefulness and hedonism of that path. So, that's just my thought.
So, my last question, and obviously we're part of initiatic orders and such, but why are so many occult teachings veiled in allegory or secrecy?
And illustrated with symbols?
Yeah, exactly. Why would you say there's the protection, this elitism, so to speak, or spiritual maybe filtration where, it's like if we're trying to compel society to be better and mankind to elevate themselves, it's like, why is a lot of this hidden or protected?
Partly because of that ethics component, I think. Not everybody's ready for it. Guarding the West Gate, as it's called, or getting people involved that are like-minded, that are ready for the experience, that are open to the experience, I think is what you want. Because you bring in people that are not of that ilk, and you're hurting the organization to some extent, in my opinion. The people that are not interested will just wash out. That's not bad. Okay, they'll come, they'll go. Maybe they'll have a seed planted in them for the future, or maybe when they reincarnate, that will spur them to greater understanding or anything like that. But the people that have a personal agenda, the ones that are seeking power, the ones that want things because they want them and they just don't care who they hurt and where they go, giving those people power, letting them in, number one, it gives them power to act with that agenda in the world. Not such a great thing, in my opinion. And number two, it hurts the organization. It either tarnishes the organization's reputation or it can destroy the organization from within, like a fifth column kind of thing. Now, look, every organization has a life cycle, right? Every organization is born, it has a period in which it exists, and then it dies. Every egregore, the same. Just like every human, the same. There are no immortal humans as far as I know. At least not occurring on this plane of existence at all times. If you want to talk about Babaji, if you want to talk about Jesus, all right, that's a conversation that we can have. But it's one of those things where, with that in mind, you want to be able to protect an organization, protect the membership, protect their path. And now I'm going to completely disagree with myself and say that I'm also a fan of William Gibson. Information wants to be free, and of the idea of total anarchy and just going and doing and discovering, because we're all immortal creatures, and what's the worst that could happen? We're just going to be born again and do it again. So within this particular game of eternal life cycles, there are no rules. There are the rules that we put there for a utilitarian purpose to try to grow and create something and become a part of something. So there it goes. There's my schizoid answer.
Cats and dogs living together. It's like Ghostbusters, but
in the beautiful San Fernando Valley.
I mean, I think what's interesting, I 100% agree with you about guarding the West Gate, and obviously most individuals probably wouldn't fit within some of these organizations, and it's not to say that I'm not diminishing anybody or saying you couldn't, but I think most are not interested in it. But, I think the question becomes, why aren't these teachings more mainstream, in the world today? Like, why are we reading Shakespeare or some other books in school as opposed to this? You
don't think Shakespeare is magic? Oh, it is. It is utter magic.
I didn't say Shakespeare isn't magic, but what I'm saying,
we're not reading ceremonial magic, right? That's just it's a whole other thing. It's of an era that existed in a certain time when that passed for education. I think the Christian bent, going all the way back to the Inquisition and spurring towards today, because the Protestants were no better than the Catholics in terms of persecuting. As we saw in the Salem witch trials and many other things. So with that in mind, we live in a puritanical country. Say what you will about things like transgender rights and all this other stuff that's cropping up recently. But we're in a very puritanical country still from our roots. And so things like magic, they're not going to be brought into the schools, at least not the public forum anytime soon, I don't think. It's just not within the warp and weft of what it means to be an American. Even though it's been in the warp and weft of what it means to be an American since the very beginning of this country, and probably before, if you look at Native Americans and their practices. So before we go, I want to give a cool idea of a tarot deck that I bought recently, and it's called the Russian Tarot of St. Petersburg. It's very, very cool. I happen to be Orthodox Christian, but not if my priest sees this, because then I won't be an Orthodox Christian anymore. But I style myself a pretty ecumenical Christian. I find comfort in the Sufi tradition. I find comfort in many traditions. And so this being from my part of the world, being a Romanian by birth, but this is a Russian deck. It has some interesting viewpoints for that part of the world. So, without further ado, isn't that pretty cool? And you can see some of the beautiful artwork that exists on it. And it was created by Yuri Shakov, who was born in the USSR in 1937. He was and I'll read that, have people read that if they wish. He was an artist and a very interesting man who created this deck. So, feel free to pause that if you want to read it. Yes, so that's just one tool for contemplation. It's also a tool for divination. So you can use it for many things, the tarot. And as you see, everything melds within everything else. There's 4 rules, 4 cardinal virtues, chakras of the body, Tephiroths of the Kabbalistic tree, Sephiroths of the Kabbalistic tree, I should say, and many other things that all you can see the Venn diagrams that come together. That if you took them all, you would have a flower of life pattern. In fact, because it'd be just encircling Vesica Pisces. So that in and of itself, again, is that goes into spiritual geometry, and a good deal of meditation can really bring in those commonalities to you and help you use them to better your life. So get out there and, walk whichever path resonates with you.
Exactly. And most importantly, meditate, pray, protect your spells. Sorry, the fireworks are going on, screwing me up over here. But protect yourself spiritually. And,
yes.
Feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or, want to debate any of the topics Alex discussed tonight.
And above all else, forgive, show love. And that is the clearest and maybe the best way towards spiritual enlightenment. So until next time, I'm your host, Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno. Thank you for joining.
He's the co-host. And yes.
Sometimes.
And until next time, this has been Brothers of the Arcana. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you soon.